2 years ago, I decided to shift into US real estate as a Canadian, and I figured that the easiest thing to get started with and learn a new market was, of course, wholesaling. It is a low cost, low risk, high reward avenue to pursue if you're willing to put in the effort. Now for me, wholesaling has always been a great way to not just make some quick money, but also to use as an acquisition strategy for buying off-market cash flowing properties and flips. So it's a great foundation piece no matter what you're trying to do in real estate. But now, as a Canadian living in Canada, am I able to wholesale real estate in the US without having to physically be there? The answer to that is yes, but of course, you're going to need a system. So after many months of trying and failing and learning, I finally figured out the process and I landed my first wholesale deal, cashing in at $14,000 US, where today we have a regular deal source coming in for both wholesale purposes as well as acquisitions. And I'll share with you what that looks like as we get through the story. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna try to make this whole thing sound like it was really easy or anything. The first few months were a total disaster, and they were like that for a few reasons. Number one, I didn't have a network. Number two, I wasn't aware of the tools and resources available to me. And three, there are some spectacular differences between real estate in the US versus Canada that I was just having a little bit of trouble adjusting to. In this video, I'm going to tell you exactly how I bridged all of those gaps, and I'm going to explain how you, as a Canadian, can wholesale real estate in the US while still living in Canada, just like I did. Now, the goal of this video is really to focus on what you need to know in order to transition into the US market. But if you're not familiar with what wholesaling is, there are essentially 5 steps, no matter what market you're going into, that you need to know about. And that is, of course, generating leads, qualifying leads, making offers, securing contracts, and finally, assigning those contracts, which is how you're going to get paid. And the nuances are all about how you do everything in between. So in order to understand how to apply all of this, I want to group this video into 3 main sections: networking, tools and resources, and finally, Canada versus US real estate, which is essentially focusing on the distinct differences between the markets. And at the end, you will have a preliminary understanding of the gaps that you need to bridge in order to start wholesaling in the US. Let's talk about the first thing, which is network. Now, the main issue I had here when I first got into the US market was really the fact that I didn't know anybody that I could work with. So even though I do have prior experience wholesaling, I didn't have anybody I could trust, rely on, and most importantly, visit the properties that I was interested to work on and see if they were even worth the effort. I needed somebody who could be my boots on the ground. So what did I do? I started calling people. I started calling realtors, property managers, contractors, leasing agents, photographers, videographers, junk removal companies, anybody that would service homeowners. I wanted to be their friend. I was calling up everybody, telling them that I'm a new real estate investor in town from Canada and I'm looking to buy properties anywhere from 1 to 4 units, needing some TLC, slightly below market value, C to B class neighborhoods, and that if anyone found a deal for me, I'd cut them in on some money. So it sounded pretty good. But now the point of doing these introductions isn't so that I have all these guys out there looking for deals for me, because that's not going to happen. They don't know me, I don't know them from a hole in the ground, so why would they want to work with me? But you see, now that they know me, and now that I've introduced myself as a player, successful wholesaling is all about relationship holding and nurturing. So how do I nurture these relationships and make it so that one of these people that I'm connecting with is going to actually want to work with me so that we can work together? Well, what I did was I started focusing first on a few buying realtors. And when I did come across a property I was making an offer on that I wanted to visit, I would call them and I would essentially ask them if they wanted to go visit that property for me, and I would arrange it. And I would either talk to them about cutting them in on the commission should we be successful at closing a deal, or I would just pay them for the time as they went, 50 to 100 bucks, something like that, and it made sense. Now, realtors are obviously going to be a great first choice in terms of somebody you're going to want to work with, because first of all, they're going to be professional. Usually they're rather articulate, and there's also a lot of mutuality in the relationship that you're cultivating with them, because there's a pretty easy way to circulate business to each other as you both grow. And contractors, well, they're also going to be quite good for a lot of distressed properties, which honestly, that's going to be a lot of the bread and butter of the types of properties you're going to be finding, but they're not going to have as much time as realtors are going to have, because the good contractors are going to be busy and they're not necessarily going to make time for you unless you ramp up that relationship even further. Now, once you've made enough connections like these, you now have someone that you can call on to do some of the legwork when the time comes, and you won't have a deal slip out from right under you. Which I don't know if I'm going to put this part in the beginning or if I'm just going to leave it at this part in the video, but one important thing I feel like I should mention here is that you don't have to be an American in order to wholesale real estate in the States. You can got to remember that first of all, you're never actually taking possession of the property itself. You're not actually holding title. You're just signing the paperwork, and the only thing you're going to need to do is be able to receive the money when it's time to get paid. And how do you do that? You need to open up a US bank account. And to open up a US bank account, you can do that as a Canadian already through any of the big Canadian banks like RBC, TD. You pick one of them. They probably have American branches that you can open an American account. There you go, you can receive money. And now you may say, yes, Andrew, but aren't there other things that Americans have or can do that you can't, and that would make wholesaling a little bit easier? The answer to that is not really. You know, aside from having an American phone number, you can use any one of these apps available to us and get an American phone number. It's good to get a phone number with an area code of the state that you're operating in, and you can get free ones and you can get paid ones. Obviously, paid ones are going to be better for you. I highly recommend getting one of those. With that all being said, let's move on to the second section, which is tools and resources. Now, here's the thing about tools and resources that are available to an American market versus a Canadian market. It really seems like there is no privacy in the US, which is why we always hear about all these Americans complaining about how their privacy and their information isn't being protected, and that's because, well, it isn't. So how does that translate into tools and resources for me as a wholesaler? Well, in Canada, in order to source off-market deals, we do have to do some relatively unintrusive marketing, and I'm talking about flyers, Facebook ads, postcards, door knocking, which is probably the most intrusive you'll get in Canada, and maybe Facebook stalking, good old networking, that kind of thing. You might find a deal on Marketplace, somebody's trying to sell the property themselves, or you might find it on Craigslist, whoever using Craigslist in Canada anymore, that type of thing. But now in the US and in most states, you can look at a house, go to a house, write down the address, and go on to any one of these websites, several that are available to you or tools that you can use, and look up the name of who owns that property, which is crazy. And from there, you can either skip trace their phone number, or in some cases, you can take the address that you're actually looking at, and you can skip trace that address and find out the name and phone number and associate affiliates and all these other kind of information about that property and the people who are affiliated to it, including the lawyer who maybe did the deed, including people who signed for it. It's just a lot of very sensitive information. And this is particularly useful if you want to look at specific types of properties. Like let's say you want to find semi-distressed duplexes, or houses that have been boarded up, or houses that have been foreclosed on or are going into foreclosure. Let's say you want to find somebody who has recently inherited a home or has fallen behind on either their taxes or their mortgage payments. This is all highly sensitive information that is available for you to buy. And the thing is that if you're not using these resources, you're getting outcompeted by other American wholesalers left, right, and center. By the way, guys, I do want to take this opportunity to mention that I know all this information can seem like a lot, and it took me quite a while to figure all these things out. But just understand that you can do all these things yourself, no problem. The tools and the resources are all available out there for you. But if you feel like you want a little bit of extra help, maybe some guidance, coaching with me or my team, there will be a link in the description if you feel like you want a little bit of extra help. Otherwise, be sure to join our community and get involved with some of our events. But now I want to talk to you guys about the key differences between the Canadian versus the US market that I was totally unfamiliar with. Now, one of the biggest differences that I had to adjust to was the disparity between neighborhoods. I would look at properties in a B-class neighborhood, and then I would look one block over and it would be like a D-. It was like night and day, and it was not like there was even tracks that were dividing these areas. It was just a street, and the two neighborhoods were completely different. And I feel like this is also a good point to mention that while we are talking about how to wholesale remotely, this is going to teach you how to wholesale remotely. That's what we're talking about here. But I did go over there initially, especially to get a kind of feel for everything and also to meet people to build my team. And I also feel like this is a good point to mention that it is a good idea to go to the place at least once or twice if you are interested in exploring that market, because the way that it looks on paper can be very different from the way that it looks in reality. And another thing is that there is a big difference between what Canadians are used to versus what Americans are used to. And this is a big deal. When I was looking at C-class neighborhoods, I thought it was fine. And then I would go to some C-minus neighborhoods, and there are definitely some areas, some C-minus areas that I'm very uncomfortable with. But a lot of Americans are like, yeah, this is normal. There's a market for that. Especially Canadians would look at some areas and think, oh, I wouldn't want to touch a property like this. You got to remember that this is not for you. You are not taking title of these properties. You are trying to secure a better deal than somebody else would otherwise be able to. And by securing that deal, you're able to wholesale it to them for a commission, and you're able to make a spread. So if there is already a market, which is why you have to look at the data, you have to look at, are properties being transacted in that area? Who cares if you like the area or not, right? Because you're not buying the property, somebody else is. Are there transactions happening? If they are, you look at the data, you pay attention, and you make informed decisions, and that is how you go about it. So that adjustment that we have where we look at things from a Canadian lens and we have a different expectation, whether it's renovations, quality of neighborhoods, or even crime, it's very different. You need to take that, remove it, park it on the side and look at the numbers. And that's a big adjustment that you're gonna have to make. All right, so now another thing that I want to talk about is the properties themselves. This is a lot more tangible and I think easier to understand, but in Canada, it's not that uncommon to see basement apartments. And in many places in the US, basement apartments are just not that common of a thing. You'll see finished basements, but they are often used as either storage, utility, they're just there and unfinished. And another thing I found that was interesting was that as I was looking at purpose-built duplexes, a lot of duplexes and also triplexes, they all have their own furnace and their own water tank, meaning each unit has their own furnace and their own water tank. And you're gonna find that in every municipality, there's going to be like a thing to that city or to that municipality that's going to be different from another place. The States definitely has a lot of diversity when it comes to the states themselves, between cities, and then also between like demographics, populations, areas, and all kinds of things. So it's almost like there's a lot of lines that really separate areas, and there's a very obvious difference, but it's obvious when you're actually there. So you need to work with a team and work with people who actually understand where these differences start and where they end. So what's another good thing to talk about here? I think financing. Yeah, let's talk about financing, because financing is a big deal, right? In order for somebody to buy a property, and there's things that you need to understand about financing, and the reason why, for example, in the States, cash buyers are very important when it comes to transacting a property, and it has a lot to do with the rules over there, where if you need financing to be in place, the properties in some cases might have to be in a certain condition, whereas otherwise they do not need to. So sometimes that leads to finding opportunity, where if you find a property that has all kinds of problems, a financer won't finance that property, like a big bank won't finance it, so they need to sell it to a cash buyer who's going to turn the place around, who has the capital to buy it and the capital to renovate it, which means that property is going to be bought at a discount. This isn't even with us talking about all the amazing off-the-shelf products that financiers have for real estate investors. So you know, like in Canada, we want to BRRRR a property, we have to get a private lender into a property to acquire it, renovate it, and then we'll refinance it with an A lender. Well, in the States, they have financial institutions that have packaged this process in for you because they know exactly what you're doing. So if you're trying to BRRRR a property or flip a property, there are ready-to-go packages that you can get from financiers that are going to facilitate this whole process for you, which is like amazing, because it seems like their financial industry and the economy is a lot more mature over there, and they've also accepted a lot of the realities of real estate, that there is a significant financial component to it, so they've just put everything together and it works. Even when it comes to buying performance properties, you know, they're not really looking at how much money do you make and can you carry the mortgage. They're actually taking a lot of things into consideration when it comes to the true performance of the property. Even when you're flipping a property, will they let you buy it? Do you qualify for it? They're going to look at the numbers just the same as you are. They're going to underwrite it and say, does this deal make sense? And if it does and there's money on it, you will get financing, which is amazing. Let's quickly talk about closing, right? So you know how in Canada, closing, we need to have a lawyer come into the picture and we pay them a lot of money. Well, in the States, you don't need to use a lawyer. You can use an attorney, but you don't need to. You use what is called title companies over there, and they do exactly what the name says. They basically make sure to clear title. Once title is clear, they make sure to transact the whole thing. So you don't need to overpay for lawyers to transact something that they're really doing some relatively remedial paperwork. If you have a more complicated deal, maybe you're going to get a lawyer involved, but for the vast majority of deals that happen, title companies for the win. Oh man, but the truth is I can probably go on and on about all the things that work differently in the US from Canada, but I think this is probably a good place to stop, because I think you're already going to be pointed more or less in the right direction. So I started to see other people make a move from Canada to the US, and they started to really accelerate, and I'm looking at them, and it's not that they're doing different from what I'm doing or better, they are just operating in a different place, and that place is carrying them. It's like they're riding the wave instead of climbing the wave, right? And it's just they're having a much easier time at it. And I look back at this, and my biggest regret is that I didn't do any of this sooner. What I don't want to see is I don't want to see other people who are like me, who want the same things as I do, to regret not making that change sooner as well. And so we want to connect with like-minded people. We want to draw people in who want to also big themselves up and make significant changes to their lives. And as of now, I'm very happy to say that we have taken dozens of students along with us in our expansion into the US real estate market, and they have seen tons of success, all the way from wholesaling to acquiring cash flow positive properties, and even some house flippers who wanted to take their game over to the States, and even some house flippers who wanted to take their game over to the States and also apply for that E2 visa so that they can later go get citizenship. There's a lot of great plays that you're able to make here. It's just a matter of how and when are you going to do it. So I know I've said it before, and I will say this again, but if you have been playing the real estate game in Canada, you, my friend, have been playing on hard mode. I've been playing on hard mode. And the thing I've found is that going across the border changes that setting from hard to easy. And if you don't believe me, you can find out for yourself. And if you want to do that, join our community, join our events. Come with us on this journey, and I will see you on the other side. Take care. If you need a more detailed video on how you can get started wholesaling in the States, check out one of our other videos. It's going to be linked somewhere here, and it's going to be a step-to-step guide on how you can start wholesaling in the US.